Welcome back, everybody. Thank you very much for rocking up to our fourth session, and a little over the speed hump now, heading towards the end on of the 6-session course here on leadership, and hopefully building lots of different people's confidence around their leadership capability and ability to potentially to contribute in that kind of council arena. But I know not many people on the scale of this course are actually into that, but other people hopefully picking up bits and pieces that'll enhance their own leadership journey, which is really cool. I like that. I'm really glad that we've been able to bring that to you. Had some really good feedback about Ursula's session last week and Michelle's the week before. And tonight you can just see her on the left side of my screen anyhow, Jess Hickman there. So give her a quick wave. She's going to be our guest speaker tonight. She's got her own great stories to tell, and I think in a really important message for a start, and a great role model for all of us, including the women particularly on that front. So tonight's a little bit, we're still talking about leadership material for sure, and I've tied it all very tightly in with leadership, but a lot of my background's in the marketing space. So tonight we're going to talk a lot about stakeholders and customers as a kind of way to work out who's out there and what's going on with people, so that we can have a much tighter, better interaction with them, and hopefully get to the places we want to go to in terms of achieving our goals. In reality, we don't get to work by ourselves that much, and there's always people around us who we have to understand their motives and their needs and their wants, I guess, at the end of the day. And when we do that, we have a much higher level of chance of success when we do that. Works in the business space, and it'll work in your leadership space as well. This is where we're up to, moving along through the list down there. Next week, we've got Paz Serendidis to talk about conflict and solutions associated with that. Tonight's Jess, that's her work there, and her link is in the deck. I'll share the PDF after we finish tonight as well. And we're going to catch up on the homework quickly, talk about a few things, finish up on some brands, and hopefully do a bit of an exercise on stakeholder management, which we can all contribute to because we're a small group in this space. Then we're going to hear from Jess at the end of that one. So from last week, we've been talking, and I'm maybe a little obsessed by it, which is why it's at the top of the list still, is your curiosity muscle. Hoping that people are still being curious about everything that's coming their way, and putting a new set of lenses on to effectively judge less and understand more about the people we're running into, the situations we run into, and getting better informed so we can make better decisions. Certainly leaders benefit by not being judgmental off the bat and not reinforcing old stereotypes and things like that. And that helps us all kind of work well and move together. Let me just get my phone on that. That's good too. Thank you very much. The second thing was, how are your strengths developing? I've just been tuning up mine a little bit. I'll show you that in a second from that grid that we've been using. Are you leveraging your strengths more? Who's got anything going on which says, yeah, I've thought about my personality profile, or I've thought about my emotional intelligence, and I'm working that a little harder for myself. I'm working that a little harder around the people that I'm working with. And I would expect that you are, and you should be getting good results by doing that. You'll be having conversations at a different level to what you used to have, and you'll be understanding things in a way that you probably weren't consciously putting the effort into in a space before that as well. Two things we talked about last week was the growth mindset, and hopefully you've been leveraging that also. Growth mindset's a way to seek new solutions for maybe old problems, or certainly when we come into vexing and complex problems, we need to have a more open mind about what's going on. And if we try to apply last year's solutions mentality, status quo to the problems that face us moving forward, it's very difficult. And I guess working into Jess's space there, if we reinforce the status quo all the time, it's really problematic for us to enact change and to move forward and move out of old, less value-based routines as well. A little piece that popped into my feed, and also Michelle sent it to me as well, which was good, on LinkedIn, about aligning your values and motivations and skills with civic leadership. So there's a nice little LinkedIn link for you there, and it's definitely right along the line with what we were talking about last week. So I beat them to the punch by a couple of days on that story. So that's kind of good news for us. But it does highlight that values particularly are an important place to start to understand what's going to work well for you, what's going to upset you, and to identify when people are treading on your values so that you can take alternate actions and you can leverage your emotional intelligence to move forward in those kind of spaces. So this is my kind of strengths and opportunities chart, which I've been working on there. I added my values up the top there. You guys are welcome to, or we should be developing yours at the end of the day as well. trust and transparency are two things that were important to me. You guys gave me a list of things that were important to you as well, and it's in last week's deck where we added those things to it. Important for you to especially the values thing is important for your confidence. When you're getting your values trodden on, your confidence is going to go through the floor. And so we need to kind of defend those a bit, and we need to speak up for them, and we need to think about how we can make them play out best for us, and not derail our efforts as well. Down the bottom here, I've added a couple of things which I think people would say I'm good at, and coming out of last week's session, just to pump out the graphic here. I feel that I'm pretty good at engaging others in decision-making, and particularly part of my personality profile talks about encouraging brainstorming and getting ideas from others. And I'm doing a number of other courses around decision-making at the moment with a number of different players, and moving away from individual decision-making, where that has been a bit of a mold for many people, into a more collaborative space is super important. And so people that can bring ideas together are going to end up with a richer resource in terms of what decisions we're going to make moving forward as well. Also this week I've discovered we had a bit of sickness running around the house and those kind of things, and so it was a bit of a hectic week in our household, but I've crossed people pleasing off my list of weaknesses. And you may or may not have seen it in my Facebook profile. I have a echidna on there, which is a bit spiky on the outside and a bit of an annoying pointy nose. So I've decided I'm working away from being people pleasing and just getting on with the Andrew story more so. And certainly after being sick all week, other people in the house would probably think that as well. So working on that and continuing my journey on emotional control based on some of those things as well. This has been my kind of centerpiece, which I'm just going to go back to for that second. Inspiring the team, inspiring the people around you, inspiring your family members, inspiring your footy club. We watched the Matildas get up and have a bit of a win. That can't remember what even night that was last week. And they're an inspiration probably to all of us because of the depth of talent in that team, the number of leaders within that team, which I'm pretty sure is all of them. The way they interact with their coaches and their trainers and all those things is pretty amazing. And we'll talk a little bit more about Matildas a bit later tonight when we talk about branding. So that's a great example of that. Influencing, inspiring, and helping others. And in this group, I know we have a huge number of people who are doing all sorts of things at very different levels to take people on a bit of a journey, to change the way they think about the world. And that's a really important thing. Well, it's a responsibility of all of us to step up into that space to a certain extent and do what we can to make that one happen. So I'm on a mission for this. I know most people in this group here are on the mission for that, and they're making some stuff happen. So tonight we're going to talk about stakeholders, which takes me into customers and a little bit about branding and sort of communicating. And we're going to deal with communication in our final week as well. But the stakeholder thing is really important. And a lot of the work that I do on project management, project managers are right into stakeholders. They spend a lot of time thinking about that. The rest of us tend not to invest a lot into different stakeholders and identifying and assessing their ability to impact what we do as an individual, as a leader for sure. And there's all sorts of stakeholders out there, and they're all over the place in our world. So it's interesting to have a deep dive into who the stakeholders in your projects and who in your life are, because they have a potential to have both a very positive impact on what you achieve, but some stakeholders can also have quite a negative impact. And in fact, they're out to make sure that you don't achieve the things that you want. And we really would rather know about that and manage it rather than get caught up in somebody else's, poor ethics or bad game or whatever else might be going on in that space as well. If we consciously manage the different people that are around us in ways that's a positive way, so we're largely understanding, it'll help us make better decisions. It'll help us be more responsive. It'll help us to be more kind of agile in the things that get thrown our way. And we've already discussed over previous week that that's an important space to be. So I've got a couple of little models here which help us understand stakeholders. This one here is called the power interest model. It's kind of a cool way to think about things. I detest power to a certain extent. That's a personal thing for me. So I'm not really fussed on the high power, low power thing, except that power exists in society. It's all over the place. People leverage it in all sorts of different ways. So it's probably a reasonable aspect to think about how people interact with us and how they kind of flex their muscle towards us in different times. Certainly when after looking at the Amy Cuddy video last week, she talked about the low power opposers particularly. So people in particularly low power positions are very vulnerable and not in a particularly good way for themselves. So we've got people that might fall down the bottom there, low power, and we've got people that might have very high power. So thinking government, police, the FBI, president, maybe the prime minister, the bully at work, as it could be. All sorts of different people have power levels which are different. Across the bottom, we've got interest in terms of how much interest they're likely to have versus how low interest they might be likely to have. And we can see up in the top right corner of that graph there, where we've got people that have high power. So people that have high power have the ability to influence our goals, what's going on, how likely we are to be successful in those spaces to a certain extent, both in a positive and a negative kind of way. And if they have high interest in the process, then they're going to be all over us in some way, interested in what we're doing, how we're doing it, what's going on. And if that's all positive, if these people can help us on our journey, that's really awesome. And we can actually leverage those resources. We can learn more about it. And in fact, they might open up new ways to understand things and see things. And that's really valuable thing to make that happen. If I was a drug dealer, for example, people with high power might be the police, and they might have high interest in my drug dealing. So that would be an area where I would monitor what the police are up to. So I get myself a scanner or something other like that, possibly to do it, or something even more sophisticated if I was actually really a drug dealer and I knew what I was talking about. On the low interest, high power, these are people that can influence our life in ways, but they don't care that much. So getting a council to approve your DA would be an example where they have high power. Their interest largely is pretty low, but if you do the wrong thing by them, they're going to come down on you. They're going to give you a fine or do something or make you tear a building down if that would be the case as well. So we want to play the game with these people. We want to know what's going on to deliver what we need to. Usually no more, no less, because helping or working with stakeholders can be a little resource intensive as well. So in the opposite bottom corner there, we've got people who have high interest, but they're not likely to cause us too much grief. So that's the keep informed box. That's really a communication thing. So in our organisations, we might have lots of newsletters, we might have circulars, even in our community, in our sports club, we might do stuff to just keep people on the boil, what's going on, this is where we're up to, and those kind of things as well. So just important ways to think about aspects that are going on. In the bottom corner there, if power is low, it's not going to be too threatening to us. If interest is low, probably don't have to worry about it unless that changes. And sometimes we get interest changing and potentially power changing over time. And one of the examples I wanted to kind of allude to or talk about tonight is the rise of the group in Bathurst called Figure It Out. And given we're in the capable council space, there was a group of people that wasn't many in the beginning, but they're nearly 6,000 people at this particular point in time. So their power has risen a bit, and their interest, which was also reasonably low, was stoked by special rate variation. And so their interest has got extremely high over time. And the stakeholders of Figure It Out Bathurst have had to kind of respond to that and learn about that. And to the extent that that's going well or poorly for them, I think that's still up in the air. And with an election in the pipeline, we're going to see how that particular stakeholder relationship starts to play out for local government, as it would be. This is a cool grid, which we'll do a little bit of an activity on in a while. And as I mentioned, stakeholder management, I think, is underrated. Few people spend a lot of time thinking about it and then are surprised when people jump up and go, oh, I don't think I like you doing that, or wow, what are you doing about that? Or why is that affecting me now? And then start to maybe flex their power or rally power from the people, as it might be as well. Largely, we would find that most stakeholders are reasonably good value for us or a bit benign. But when you're, let's say, Australia, groups like Get Up, sometimes the unions are pitched in a negative mode for different organisations, but other organisations would say the unions are very valuable to them as well. So the who and the value of the stakeholder is really context specific about where you're standing and what's going on with that particular stakeholder. So as a leader, and as maybe a leader of a project team or a leader of a team at work or a leader of something that needs to be done, it's best to try and ID as many stakeholders as you possibly can. And you might do that by literally having a bit of a look around, a few Google searches. We might go out and actually get some research done as well to find out who's out there. Then we want to try and understand them, which is about gathering information on different stakeholders as well. And given that we probably will have many stakeholders, we need to prioritise our stakeholders so we can work out who do we need to consciously and confidently focus on so we can maximize the resource that they are, or if they're a negative force in some way, we can minimize their impact on the things that we need to do to make that one happen. As mentioned on the previous slide there, once we know who the stakeholders are, we might actually unleash some new resources for the thing that we need to get done. And I believe, again, out of that, for the Figure It Out Bathurst group, they've actually been, there's a certain amount of money they're allowed to raise for running for council for the number of people that they're running on their ticket. And they've exceeded that already, because out of the woodwork, a bunch of local small to medium business organisations have popped up and gone, hey, yeah, this is really good. We want to affect some change in the world. And so we do want to affect change largely, and that's a pretty good thing to have happen. So here's my pretty dodgy graphics of stakeholders as it might be, and we might just workshop a couple of ideas around this space as well. Excuse me. And we just use the example that someone might be running for election, because that's where we started out with capable councillors and leadership. And so you're stepping up, you want to make a difference, you want to make some things happen, you're going to want to stand for election, you're going to need to nominate. I believe we're just 100, or actually under 100 days out from the local government elections now. So there's a riveting date for your calendar. Make sure you've got that one in, and make sure you vote. That's important as well. So you got your election campaign, and you just go, well, I'm just going to run for council. Off we go, make that happen. We've got a whole bunch of stakeholders which I've sort of identified, and you guys could feel free to jump in and tell us some more about that as well. But there's you for sure. Likely a very important stakeholder in your life will be your family. Now, they're not running for election in this case, or running for leadership, or whatever the particular thing is you're running for, but they're going to be impacted by what's going on. And to the extent that you have lots of support, that you have small children, that you have busy work lives, the other grey box down there is about the work you probably do, or whoever's employed by you. They might be very supportive. They might not want you to see you losing lots of time to things as well. And so all of those things impact. In the orange dots there, we've got the council. Councils, and I wonder about this as I was putting this together. I wonder how interested councils are in elections. I suspect they're very uninterested in elections, and in fact, they're probably a bit of a prickle in their annual operating plan. The fact that they actually have to do them, and that these people rock up to be elected and to sit at meetings with the council, and have have the ability to ask them questions, I suppose, at the end of the day. We're also very interested in who the other candidates are, and I've broken the other candidates into two different groups here in terms of stakeholders, because they would have different positions. Other candidates who've never been a councillor before would have a very kind of open mind. They're probably very excited about what's going to happen next. They're interested in a whole range of issues, and they probably have some level of platform to do it. Incumbent candidates who have to run again, they're probably less excited about having to run again and have maybe their power-based question based on that, and have to go through being re-elected or reassessed or re-evaluated or rejudged by the people to a certain extent. So their psyche and their mindset, because of that, is going to be a little bit different, and that's going to impact the way they're going to behave, and certainly the way they're going to behave to new people who want to run for an election, for sure. The red circle down the bottom, there's New South Wales Election Commission. They would be high power but reasonably low interest. I know they would have high interest because it's an election, but they just want the process to run smoothly, and for there to be no scandals or skirmishes, and the votes to be counted appropriately and be auditable, and they can report that to the state government, and then they'll be happy with that. They don't get involved in the issues at any level, at any location. So high power but low interest on that front as well. Then we moved up into voters, and I've just put a block there, voters all, and I've got it on the next slide there. Bathurst has got around 31,000 voters, apparently. So in a population, I'm not sure what Bathurst is, but about 42, I think we might be at the moment. So that means that around maybe 10,000 or so might be under the age of 18 at the moment, so they're not registered to vote. As in terms of getting elected, do we care about that particular group of stakeholders who are under the age of 18 yet? We probably don't want to blow them off at the end of the day, but certainly in terms of their voting potential, they're not going to have a massive impact on whether I get elected or don't get elected going forward. So we'll get more into the voters in a second. There's also a group of people who are non-voters. Some of them are over the age of 18, and I'll pull them apart on the next slide also. One of the important stakeholders for this particular group too is who's influencing voting. So there'll be individual people in the community who have high ability to influence how people vote. We might call them different community leaders. They might be from different parts of possibly government, definitely the community, maybe from sporting bodies, maybe from not-for-profit organisations, etc., who have the ability to, reach out to people to get interviewed on radio stations and those kind of things, and be published in the media. They might also be quite influential in social media in their own rights, across Instagram, Facebook, possibly Twitter. I'm not sure about that for Bathurst so much, and other places where they can, where one person there can reach out to maybe 10 others and say, hey, vote this way, or I think this is a good issue, or don't vote on this issue as well. So in terms of an election campaign as a state, as a group of people, the media and other influencers could be really important to your success on that front to getting that done, because they can reach people that you maybe as an individual can't reach so easily. So if we were to think about all the different stakeholders there and maybe just run through this chart. So the chart down the side there represents the wheel on the previous slide. First thing we want to do is to understand, in this case, voters particularly, what's going on with them, and understand maybe the Electoral Commission or current councillors, so the different stakeholders we've identified. It's really good to understand what those people's mission is, and if they want to change the world, if they want to boost arts in the region, if they want to change the angle of parking to 60 degrees instead of 45 degrees, big issues, then we want to know about that so that we can work with or know where the friction's likely to come from for our different things. If we're talking about frustrated voters, their strengths and weaknesses might be, and certainly in Bathurst, one of the pictures of frustrated voters would have been the people who attended the physical rally in the downtown centre of Bathurst opposite the council chambers. And I don't know, I'm going probably promoters figures there, but there might have been up to 2,000 people or so on a weekday afternoon, which was probably impressive, I would have thought. And normally people don't care so much about that. To get that many people motivated to come and stand in the park during the afternoon was probably pretty good. So their strengths are, there's some numbers there. Their strengths are they were quite vocal. Their strengths are they've got people who are monitoring what's going on with them. Their weaknesses certainly 3, 4, 5 months ago was that they were a very fragmented group, people who are frustrated voters or would like change. But as we draw closer to the election, they're actually they're dispelling that weakness, and they're coming together with more of a concerted effort about what's going to happen here, who should run, who do we support, and a range of other things like that. For frustrated voters, let's say they're being represented by the Figure It Out Bathurst group as well. Their strategy is to run a bunch of new nominations for council. So Bathurst Council has 9 positions. They want to field potentially up to 9 individuals, I believe, and I believe they've got 5 or so already. Plus, there's other people also who are getting ready to stand up. So one of the strategies for frustrated voters is to expand the field of people who can nominate to become councillors. And if we know that, that's really good. Talking to Michelle the other week, and I don't know how that Blaney thing's going, Michelle. I'm sorry to throw you under the bus again on that front, but the field for that group is very narrow, and there's not a lot of further interest, I guess, at this particular point in time. Is there 100 days out?
No obvious interest at all. And that's really concerning because, I think the larger centres around us there's more people, and there's more people available to maybe put their hands up. The concern around my council is that we'll end up or continue the lack of diversity in my LGA. Most people, the obstacles to being a councillor are very high, particularly for women, but particularly for also younger people who have families and commitments and work and whatever else. And we're still not making it a place where those things are considered in the council chambers. And I think that's a real problem, because until we actually show that we can make it an accessible place and an inclusive place, we're going to struggle to get that diversity and those other people coming on board.
So it's difficult. In the short term, if there's no extra people to run, that's a real big problem. So the current incumbent candidates in your particular area, and I'm sure this is true for other areas, probably are quite content with that scenario, and in fact probably don't want to change that, because The more candidates that run, the more work they'll have to put into doing what they do to get returned back to the position which we assume, unless they're resigning, they've been reasonably happy with at the end of the day. So other incumbent candidates, both in Bathurst, Blaney, and I would imagine any other local government area across the country, would be largely not encouraging and, in fact, actively discouraging people to run for office in those spaces. So it's a bit of a flawed system in that way. So that's really goes back to the community's got to be able to stand up and work out ways to rise up. And I mentioned, I think Simon Holmes Court in the Climate 200 or the Teal campaign, their strategy was about who can we rise up out of different communities to stand with a great chance at a federal election. So that's part of the story there, knowing what the strategy is of, let's say, frustrated voters. And in Bathurst, one of the things that is going on as part of the strategy is they're looking for people to run as candidates to broaden that field, to shake up the way the vote's likely to fall as well. The likely behaviour of frustrated voters is to be, as soon as we move towards the election in this particular footprint, all of them will be different, but they're likely to do more kind of activism. I believe there's some more meetings on the boil. They're talking to lots of people. There is an energy and a focus on what can happen next. So we know that they're not sitting still and doing nothing. The Election Commission, they're sitting still, not doing much. They're just following their rules. That's all they have to do as a stakeholder. And as we said, current councillors are probably, their likely behaviour is to actually not do much or discourage actual people wanting to nominate for that as well. Once we want to, let's say we want to run and we know that, frustrated voters are encouraging more people to run, then we can look for other people to support our campaign or support our ticket possibly as well. If we know that the Electoral Commission just wants us to play by the rules, we read the rules, follow the rules, fill in the nominations on time, do all that sort of stuff, we can run. There's no barriers against us doing that as well. And current councillors, to work with them, we might want to kind of, knowing that they're not likely to be overtly helping us, we might want to be wary of that in the first place, but we also might want to really pick and choose our conversations with current councillors because their ethic or their strategy or their behaviour, is likely to be not totally helpful for getting someone new elected, because that really upsets the status quo of where they are. And we know, and we talked about status quo in the very early week about leadership, that lots of people want to protect the status quo, the way we do things around here. And one of the aspects of this particular community is that a lot of people, or a large number of people, want to shake things up a bit. They want to see change. And that's where I wanted to get your guys' input on this one. Down the bottom of the page there is we have the logo from the free Figure It Out Bathurst group. I just snapped it off their website this afternoon and had a quick look at that. And their kind of three-word slogan. I'm sorry, Sarah, have you got an opinion on three-word slogans? They're very popular in political circles.
No, not one that I could relate, but I think that there's a really key word in that, and that's together. And knowing how difficult it is being the one person on a executive team or in a group or committee or council, it may not have been the intention, but I think the together factor of having a number of like-minded people, possibly the same minority or a minority, on a committee or a council together makes a lot more impact and difference than one of them, because one can be marginalised so effectively, whereas several are quite a power for change. So I think whether the word is intended in that way, that's how I'm reading it. Yeah,
and I think it does come across that way. I like together. It is about the community, so I like community there. So these guys, and don't particularly want to do an open critique on them, but I think it's open for discussion. Is the change thing is very interesting. So for the Figure It Out Bathurst group, as a group, they are intensely interested in change. That is nearly their mantra. They want change. But in terms of looking at it from a stakeholder and even a customer perspective, I wonder how many people are as committed to change as what they are. Yeah, they want change and they do that. But for most people, things aren't that badly broken. For lots of people in our community who work for government, local government, state government, federal government, universities, and other big stable employments, essential energy maybe, change in those organisations usually means redundancies and turmoil and crazy things. So people often don't want to opt into change because change comes with all sorts of problems associated with it. So
Well, without defining what the change is, it could just be,
yes,
we're changing the logo on the day of the meeting or something, or it could be, let's tear the place down. So I think you've got to be very clear and transparent about what the change you're talking about is, because just as you say, it means so many different things to different people.
It does, and it's a word that has probably lots of loadings with it as well. And so I think exactly your point, Sarah, capturing change with some positive spin or positive mantra about what the change is going to do. And so change for transparency, change for better budgeting, change for other things which are the more of the realities and the things that are visible in other media might be really an important part of that. And, they're just starting, so they might have to communicate all those things as well. But I wonder about their positioning on that particular aspect for this particular cause in this short stage. And I'm sure they're workshopping that. And at the end of the day, you'd probably go out to your target audience, whoever, let's say it's frustrated voters, and you'd ask them about the issues that are important to them, and you'd capture that in your kind of calls to action. And I think the community together thing are probably good. And I wonder if there's other things that frustrated voters are looking for that they want to vote for. Because again, if they don't get value from that, we're not going to do it. And that's where we're heading with a few more slides as well. So we'll just
I think
keep
there's a
sliding
real
forward on that.
risk. There's a bit of a risk there in underestimating the dead hand of bureaucracy as well, because you may storm in there with a big change agenda and then find that you have only a few levers that you can pull, and some of them not very effective. And the worst case is you get to the end of your term and those frustrated voters who thought you were the great white hope just went, well, you're just like the others. And it's not for want of trying. It's just an underestimation of the effectiveness of your power and the, effectiveness to, the ability to change.
Yeah, it's true.
It's really
and
hard. Sorry. It's really hard to enact change on the inside, despite your best endeavors or whatever. There's so many reasons why there's a block, whether it's bureaucracy, whether it's attitude, whether it's, a lack of diversity or whatever it is, but it's hugely hard to do and very frustrating. And I guess that's what I love change. I would welcome it, but it is a very, very difficult vehicle to enact change in. And I wouldn't, that's not to discourage anyone. It's just to be eyes wide open around what that looks like, because you need a voting block to be able to enact change. And in that space, you need to have specific skills to be able to do that and withhold that. And then also there becomes that unspoken you owe me within that voting block as well. So that's been quite challenging for me personally. And yeah, so not to discourage, just eyes wide open, and we certainly need more people who have the courage.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things there. It is interesting, and that voting block requires compromise, doesn't it? Because you're not going to get everything you want to get those things across the line. So, we sort of talk about values, and you don't really want to compromise those values, and you'll be caught, but then become ineffective. And I did write it down, Sarah, the dead hand of bureaucracy. There's a T-shirt in that for sure. I love it. So I'm going to
consider it yours, Andrew.
Maybe that will be my maybe will that be my campaign? I'll have that on my front of my T-shirt.
Well, we get the Grim Reaper gear on, and we'll just go out there and carve up a few councillors or something. The dead hand of bureaucracy. I love it. Death metal band for sure. All good. So I just want to talk about voters for a second, because they're people, they're important. We need to represent them to the council. And it's interesting, so Michelle, you also said that, it's hard to make change internally. The thing I jump up about that is you're not really internal. You're actually external to the council. You're a stakeholder of the councils, and you have to work with them, and you've got some, legal rights to work with them and those kind of things. But at the end of the day, they probably see councillors generally as more of a threat than an asset to their normalised operations, because they're an organisation, they want to survive, they want to do their things, and councillors, like, who are they? So they should also be more careful about mapping their stakeholders and understanding how the stakeholders can, in fact, address the business of the council. And we know that councillors can be very powerful. They can have high power if you have the right block, because they can affect the senior management of a council to make that one happen as well. But that's getting into the nitty-gritty, probably a bit too far, and I'm not as well informed as I should be as well. So when we're talking about any sort of customer group, and we're talking about voters at this stage, so in this case here, people required by law to vote. In Australia, everybody over the age of 18 is supposed to be registered. Not all of them are. And if you're registered and over the age of 18, then you are required to vote. Otherwise, you will be penalised for not taking that behaviour. So there's a disincentive for you to not do it. Though, just based on my family, younger people seem a little disengaged in things to do with voting on their busy weekends and busy lives. So the fine thing may not be as big a disincentive as it should be as well. Bathurst, we've got around 31,689 electors, so people who do vote, but we spread over this massive area. The footprint is really big for Bathurst. It's quite strange. It's quite large. And so to reach out into that footprint in an LGA sense is very difficult as well. I just did some numbers here to break things down a little bit. I figured that there's a group of people, maybe around 20%, who will just vote the same way as they did last time because they won't think about it, don't read the media, don't want to change, happy with the status quo. That's what I do every 3 years, pop out and make that one happen. And so they won't change. So that takes a chunk of 6,000 people out of that 30,000 or so. Donkey voters, non-voters, I just had a guess there's about 3,000. There is some stats out on that. I didn't go looking particularly for them, but I said about 10%. So that's still a big number of people who just couldn't be bothered on the day or in the lead up to go and vote. And for me, if I want to get elected, it's good to know those people are out there. There's two different stakeholder groups, but I really don't care, because if I can't change their mind, or they're not going to vote for me or vote full stop anyhow, then there's no value in me investing any time in talking with those particular people. So for me, the group of voters who potentially could vote for change or could be involved in change is only around 22,000 in the Bathurst footprint or so. And then I've sort of torn that apart just again to get my head around it, but also to highlight how difficult and complex this is for somebody wanting to run for election or to market a product or to sell a service or whatever it might be. We always talk about communities. Community is an awesome thing, but I honestly, as a bit of a marketer, I roll my eyes every time someone says, oh, let's talk to the community about that. Well, who the hell in the community do you talk to about building a bridge or saving the homeless or putting on a special event? You know, there's in fact, there's 21,000 voting stakeholders in the Bathurst community. And if we want to be effective with any of them, we need to dig down into some of the needs and wants of those particular groups of people, which is where we'll get to on the next slide. Thinking about the Figure It Out Bathurst group there, you know, they've got an audience that's potentially older, and maybe are they open for change or not? They voted a lot more times than most other people. Are they happy doing it the way they did last time? We've got a group of younger people who might be very open for change, but actually busy that weekend or whatever else. And I'm making some bit radical stereotyping there of people's behaviours, but there are ends that we have to understand at each end of it, so we can know how to move forward and move on from that as well. We've got people who are very big into families, adventure playgrounds, redevelopment of the park up in Lambert Street, all exciting. Families love it. Visitors love it, etc. And there's other people who don't give a rat's about parks and adventure playgrounds and that, but they would vote for the arts because that's where they want to spend their time. So again, we've got very different needs, and depending on what the issues are, people are going to choose different ways to do that. Ratepayers, we've got non-rate payers, we've got small businesses, we've got large government businesses, and I'll put the union to that basket as well. And to that end, I feel that any sort of large corporate government style businesses, the concept of change to them is very different to what the rest of the world would think about it. So we have to dig further into that to understand, what are we going to do to make those people want change, or are they actually happy with the status quo? Their organisation is happy with the status quo, so maybe they'll be happy with the status quo and they'll vote for consistency over change, as it would be as well.
Can I just say there that I think
go
a
for
lot
it,
of the corporate employees and people involved with that would be very familiar with the performance appraisal.
Okay.
And
yep.
you know, return on investment. So to the extent that they would be exposed to inefficiency or poor performance or something like that, I think they would probably be more critical of that than the general population, just because, it's like, well, you've got a budget to manage, you've got performance KPIs to deliver. And if you see other people not apparently doing that, it's probably more frustrating to you than it is to
Well, that's a great point. And so when you're being held accountable in your space and other people are not being held accountable, there's a reason to vote for change as well. So that's a really good twist on that one, which I hadn't thought about. So these are the kind of things you're looking for to understand the different stakeholder groups that are out there who might be of value in terms of targeting, in terms of getting elected and making change as it would be as well. Down the bottom here, I've just got interest groups, sporting groups. We have a lot of stuff going on around a go-kart track, but we have very powerful football, soccer, rugby lobbies in Bathurst as well. They all have membership bases. They can communicate with their membership bases. Are they a viable vehicle for change? Are they happy with the status quo? If you've just got a shiny new oval and a great new car park, maybe life's pretty good for your group as well. Tourism is big for different groups as well. Education is highly influential in Bathurst, as is agriculture, and the issues around energy, so wind farms, solar farms, are likely to have impacts for different groups as well. So, and then we've got some really specialist groups, which I'm going to categorise separate. So Figure It Out Bathurst is one of those with their 5,800 members as of yesterday, Arvo, or the Savo as it would be. Existing councillors, the council themselves, and groups as strange or as wacky as the homeless, who have an impact on the community, but maybe very low power and possibly low interest in terms of what's going on with the election base as well. So lots of interesting things out there which we can use to cut and dice our markets up, to have a think about how do we connect the dots to make it happen. Sliding this into how do we understand these people even better? This has got my marketing hat back on too. There's 4 major tools that marketers use to understand each of you guys. And as you appear in anybody's computer system, all of these things are being tracked and traced on you. And when you start to buy into big data and understand how that works, we can make some awesome predictions about the way people will behave. And marketers want to know that. And in fact, people getting elected or wanting to get elected need to know how people will behave, at least by the 14th of September to get stuff done. So geographic, for the LGA thing, we're locked into a particular geographic footprint. Most Bathurstian voters would probably reside in this footprint. Very few would be outside of it, or they will be able to vote postally to be included in that too. So nothing really exciting about geography. Certainly if, if we're talking about selling swimwear, the fact that you live in a regional location versus you live in a coastal location would have a very big impact on the kind of swimwear we might sell you and the kind of seasonality associated with that as well. So geography is important to know about how people behave. Demographics is the one that people wave around all of the time. But in this day and age, in 2024, demographics are probably one of the least explanatory sets of variables about people's behaviour and what they do and what they'll vote on, etc. A couple of things that fall under the demographics thing is the age thing. We always have people not acting their age and doing things differently to that. So that sort of devalues the age aspect. The income thing, there's some predictability about what happens with income, how you might spend it, where you might send your kids to school. But again, nothing particularly super strong in that space. Sex used to be just male or female. We have some more options on that. And these days it would be irresponsible to predict that women might behave a certain way and men might behave a different way. So that's also less value to us. There's value in some of the aspects of that, but there's less value than there would. One of the things in Australia that's still true is your education level determines what your kind of lifetime earning capacity is likely to be, and hence impacts what we call socioeconomic status, which is also demographic detail. But it's not the only thing that impacts the way you choose to spend your money. And certainly in 2024, there's lots of very wealthy, non-university educated people cruising around in their Ram trucks and having holidays in exotic overseas locations and making stuff happen. Marital status, again, used to be a big deal back in the 1950s. Lots of stuff was pivoted on your marital status, whether we take your child off you or not. Big deals in those days. These days, people can be all sorts of household living arrangements and very happy with where they're at, and it won't influence the way that they shop or vote or purchase or whatever it might be going on as well. And one of the cool stats for me is about religion. And just in my time, I've only been teaching marketing for about 20 years or so, but in the early 2000s or so, roughly 76% of Australians had a nominated Christian religion. I believe that's back under 55% or so now. So we have this massive slide back in Christian religion adoption or extrovert notification that you are. Back in the early days, and certainly before the 2000s or so, your religion would have dictated some of the products that you bought and sold, where you spent your Sundays, how you raised your kids, what schools they went to. But these days, that's far less valuable for us as well. So a lot of demographic stuff has become less valuable for us. And the things that I'm mainly interested in to understand both my customers and stakeholders as they might come together fall under the psychographics and the behavioural stuff that we do. So psychographics is probably the most interesting way to understand people. This is about your interests, attitudes, and opinions. So if you're a mad Richmond football supporter and go, yeah, Richmond go, they won a game on the weekend, apparently very pumped up about that. That's an attitude and opinion. If you live in Melbourne, that's been kind of tattooed on your arm since you were born, probably. And so you're very dialed into that particular love of a football club, and it's unlikely you would change that in your life. But also sexual orientation, global warming, carbon taxes, all of those things fall into this kind of interest, attitude, and opinional style space. And people don't give up that kind of information very easily. So it's much harder for market researchers to get hold of it, and it's much harder for us to use it predictably to understand both our customers and stakeholders, which is where I'm at too for this session here as well. The upside to this, where we're learning lots about that and we are getting some information, is anybody who's interacting with social media on any kind of level is having their interest, attitudes, and opinions collected by the way they like or click or share content on social media, which drives Facebook's algorithm, Instagram's algorithm, Twitter, Snapchat, all of those kind of things, TikTok for sure. And so they're using your psychographic styles or likes and wants as part of their input into their algorithm. So they serve up more of the stuff that you've already clicked on, of the vistas you've looked at, holiday locations you've looked at, the outrage customers videos, whatever might be going on in that space as well. So the more we know about psychographics, the more we can understand what's likely to happen and what people will actually go in for, because your values are connected to your psychographics as well. One which is a little bit easier to get information on is behavioural stuff, and certainly many organisations are using cameras. They're sort of tracking when you go to their websites, all of those sort of things. So we can get behavioural data from a digital kind of context as well. But also we can observe it from who attends parkruns on Saturdays. We can observe, and Instagram's definitely getting this, or Meta's getting this, when you're scrolling reels on Instagram, and they know you do it between 3 and 4 in the afternoon because there's a bit of a downtime where your boss is out of the office during that particular period of time. I'm fascinated in Bathurst. There's still a bit of paranoia about what does the paper say about different things. Sales of newspapers in the Bathurst region, I have got no idea what they would be, but surely they can't number more than 1,000. It's a very old school form of media sharing, and yet people do appear to overrate it as its ability to influence voters at this particular point in time. And I haven't really tested that. I think it's important for some groups of voters, but largely many audiences in that space are consciously not buying a newspaper, and they're not subscribing to The Advocate. And so they're not in that space of being influenced or doing activities around that. So traditionally, if we went back 20 years, everyone was looking at a newspaper. Probably you still had one folded up on your chair out in the sun on a Sunday morning to enjoy that too. Another bit of
Andrew, how many of those people who aren't subscribing to the hard copy of the newspaper are following the newspaper's Facebook page?
That's where I'm getting my feel, and it's only a feel from it, is the number of people, when somebody shares a link from, say, our Advocate or any other local paper as it might be, but they can't access it because they're not subscribers. And I think that's quite high. They want the whole story either cut and paste or posted somewhere because they can't access the newspaper's website because they've firewalled it. So again, I think that devalues the impact of what newsprint has on something like an election campaign, so to speak. Though some of the incumbent stakeholders, like the council, is very heavily invested in the news media in Bathurst, both radio and newsprint. But largely, I would say far more people get information from 1,000 other sources than that. And we'll have a bit of a look at, I've got a graphic on that one as well. So interesting. Behavioural stuff, eat out of breakfast after church. So we're interested in what people actually do. And we can do some research there to find out in terms of voting behaviour, do people make up their mind before they go to vote, or are they influenced by the huge number of placards, brochures handed out just seconds before they actually vote, or is their mind made up already? The bottom side of this piece of information here is just really the more we can understand about our stakeholders and the people who are out there, the better chance we've got of working more closely with them in a better positive kind of way so we can get the outcomes that we're kind of looking for. Just want to take this a little bit further. Go if you like.
Can I offer something, Andrew, just quickly on that, just around the voting stuff?
Good.
So just something that I've learned and understand. So, and particularly in the biggest centres where they run off tickets and preferences. So they already, when they hand out their voting cards, it's got the numbers down for people to actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever that is. And people generally are so literally uninformed that they often just do what's handed to them.
Yep.
And that's why tickets do well. And so there's a bit of a thing around that as well. So it's just something I've learned. We don't have tickets in Blaney because you have to have 2 tickets to run, and we only have seven councillors, so there's not that kind of opportunity to run, but it definitely loads the vote and loads the people that get on when that happens. So
does that make it more simple for Blaney voters per se to not make an error or to not just take the easy option?
No, but some of the advice I get is like when, say, for instance, when I'm running again, that I would actually hand out a vote card and say, vote, me 1, another councillor 2, 3, whatever. And if you hand it to them, they will often, for lack of any other inspiring kind of compelling action, they will just follow that vote card. And that's apparently very, very prevalent, which I was a little horrified about. It is a popularity vote, but in our LGA, for instance, Forest Reefs, everything west of Millthorpe, well, their entire life is in Orange. They work in Orange. Their children go to school in Orange. They don't even come to the Blaney supermarket. The chance of them knowing local people, or even a business owner like I am, is really low. So there's not. So we're just really relying. So there is a bit of a strategy around how you get there. I know it's not relevant, but it is relevant because that's how it runs, and it's not the greatest system, but that's the one that we're working with at the moment. So
I think it's a really good point. I think if you identify that many voters are like that, or particular segments of the voting public are like that and need to be led or guided, particularly in that space, then you've got to set up the mechanisms to provide value that way, which is great because we're on the value proposition slide, to deliver that to them so you can minimize their cognitive load of voting, which for many people you wouldn't think is very much, but it depends on that level of engagement and how much value they think's in it. Most of them would think that it's a punish for their day to have to take out a piece of their Saturday to go and do a vote. I think at the end of the day, hardly anyone, apart from the sausage sizzle aspect of it, might be that excited about it. I just wanted to do 2 more things before I hand over to Jess as well, and I'm running into a bit of time there. The value proposition is really important for customers. All of you have value propositions which you love or you dislike, and that leads to having brands you love or you would never support, as it would be at the end of the day. And so again, if you want to get elected, we need to develop a value proposition which is useful for the audience that you want to get to do something for you. You want them to vote for you because of the change you're going to bring, because of the togetherness you're going to bring, because of the community you're going to bring to make that one happen, possibly as well. So a value proposition is a package of benefits that you're going to offer your target market. And it's really what they perceive will meet their needs. So it's not what you perceive will meet their needs. And that's where the question for me about the change thing, those people are into change. People maybe not looking for change. They may be looking for transparency or accountability. And then we should talk about those things in terms of the value proposition we want to deliver to those people as well. If it doesn't meet their needs, so that T-shirt on sale doesn't meet your needs because it's too big, too small, wrong fabric, whatever, you don't buy it. So there's no value proposition for you. If it has got dead end bureaucracy on it, you might pay a premium price for that particular T-shirt to make that one happen. The value proposition works for whether you're buying, voting or donating. Everybody needs to create a value proposition that people do it. And Yeah, lots of mechanisms we put into place, and we can't get into that tonight to make that one happen. Value can be around, is usually got to do with perceptions rather than realities, and form, price, function, status, exclusivity, knowledge, availability in the motor vehicle thing during COVID was a big deal for them. Difference, impact, and ability of things. And I just put a couple of examples there in terms of the mobile phone. So for just $159, you can buy a smartphone, which is a smartphone to all intentional purposes. But you could also spend just on 5 times that amount to buy a Apple iPhone to do exactly the same job. So the perceived value of the Apple at, say, $1,300 versus the Nokia at $150 is different. It's not for everyone. Some people are going, yeah, smartphone, $150, let's go. I break one every second day. And the other person's going, oh no, it's got to be Apple, because Apple has a package of benefits that are valuable to me as well. The other stat I heard the other day, which is why the flip phone picture is in there, is that feature-based phones or non-smartphones have actually doubled their sales in the last 6 months. So people are opting out of smartphones at a rapid rate because they're not meeting their value needs through too much binging, dinging, too much connection time, and not enough downtime away from their phones, I believe. Influencing customers. So these are some of the options. This is US data, and it's from 2019, so it's got a little bit of dating about it. The thing I liked about this, which is really important, again, if you want to get elected or you want to make change and you want to use media to make that happen, is the dark blue column there is about the number of people who use these information sources. The light blue column, though, is about the number of people who use these information sources and trust that information source. And the number one thing in this space, and so if you want to get elected, one of the ways you could get elected would be to use friends and family and the networks that friends and family bring to communicate about the good work you're going to do for the community and the change and accountability and whatever the budgeting things might be to make that one happen. Friends and family continues to top out. The only place that friends and family also is influential is in some social media situations where you will take referrals from your social media friends and social media family and trust those quite highly as well. Interesting, down the end of the track there, you know, at websites, people always take them with a grain of salt. Nobody really believes what's on there in that space as well. Company websites, people like them a little bit. Social media, it's a bit of a mixed bag there about how much trust is involved in that. So we have to be careful about where we want to pitch our brand so we can get the message across to our target market or to our stakeholder if we're going broadcast with our stakeholders to make that one happen. We want to influence and change behavior, so we need to choose trusted mechanisms to get that. The less trust, less likely to change. Higher trust, more change going to come out of that. I just wanted to finish my section on a bit of stuff about branding, because brand is a shortcutting mechanism for customer to know which way to vote or which way to act or who to invest in or what to do. And we have personal brands. The girl down the bottom corner might represent that. And we've just got a before and after example of a photograph there. So her personal brand on the right side of that screen looks really interesting and engaging, more than likely. And they've done a bit of work from the original, which is on the left part of that screen. All these brands have stuff going on which we are interested in or not interested in so much. Just yell out something that inspires you about Nike. What's something that comes to brand when I put the swoosh up on the screen there?
Simple and
usually got it.
ubiquitous.
Oh, yeah. So what was the first word?
Simple and ubiquitous.
And ubiquitous. There you go. So less of a fan, I'm thinking there for Sarah. You're not walking in your Nikes every day.
No, it wasn't. It's not that. It's just, you know, it is very everywhere and very recognizable, but it's deceptively simple.
It is, yeah. It's all of those things. What else do we think about Nike? We should be able to get 9 different perspectives on Nike out of this group.
I think
Does
they're
it come
really.
to mind?
No.
Go, Trudy.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I know my opinion is very different to my 16-year-olds.
Highly likely.
Yeah. So the value proposition is very different between us with that. When I look at it, it's, yeah, very simple, could probably go for other purchasing decisions, but the marketing that they've done is very clever. So I do recognise that because the ads flash through your mind when you do see the logo. But for a 16-year-old, it's the be all and end all.
There you go. And so Just Do It lives on, Michael Jordan lives on, all those things are associated with it as well. Jess, did you want to yell out something? What's the Nike for you?
Oh, for me personally, I've read Shoe Dog, so I know the backstory of the hustle of Nike. So I think that I am a Nike wearer, and I was actually thinking about the comparison of it's cool to wear New Balance at the moment, and I was actually shopping online and they popped up, and my husband said, "My pop, his grandpa used to wear them," and I said, "All the cool kids are wearing them now."
There
So
you
it's
go.
interesting
So
brands move with times and generation. So yeah, I think for me, I love my Nikes, but I wear my Nikes until they no longer are on my feet, whereas some people change them all the time.
yeah, well, some people have a cupboard full of them as well. And so you won't be
Yeah.
trading up to New Balance until your husband's pop kicks his off and gets
I
out
don't
of
think
them.
I'm
I'm thinking,
cool enough. I don't think I'm cool enough.
"Ah."
You know, I'm not Gen Z. The Gen Zs are all down with the New Balance and the TikToks. I'm not quite that.
There you go. Get some moves on to make that happen too. So there's a whole bunch of history about Nike. Some people die for them. So Trudy's son, keen for them, wants to have 50 shirt pairs, wants to wear them once, keep them clean. It's all really good. There was a period of time for Nike, they were all about child exploitation, child labor, and a whole range of things like that. And they were very on the nose, but not to everyone, but just to certain groups. And it just talks about how brands can help segment people who love and people who hate. I just want to keep moving too. If I pop up the Robodebt brand, what's some of the first impressions of Robodebt brand for you? It's a brand in its own right. It's been published. It's been printed. Everyone has an opinion on that and what kind of value it represented to them.
Social equity and a massive power imbalance.
Yeah, cool. And I think that's good. I'm with you on that one as well. Anyone voting for Robodebt? A bunch of people did because it came into life and existence. People went, Robo, it's going to be great. Get those doll bludgers out of here. It's going to be great. So again, it's a brand with a bunch of values associated with it. Most of us would not aspire to those or want to be part of those as well. I just want to do one more before I move on because I was just looking at this and I think the Matildas might be getting ripped off on their branding by Football Australia. If I was to look at the picture of the people in it with Matildas in it versus the logo that says Matildas there, which one of those speaks louder to the Matildas, do you think?
Definitely
girls.
picture.
Yeah. And I think so too. I think the girls jumping out, if I was to flash back and I was going to even buy some Matildas merchandise, which I might have done, that would be what would do it. It's young, it's fit, it's fast, it's penalty shooting, it's collegial, it's green and gold, it's a whole bunch of things. And yet the way Football Australia's pitching Matildas is a very conservative, wiffly waffly, ribbony thing with just the Matildas on it. And in fact, when they become, the Qantas Matildas or the Westpac Matildas, or I can't remember, Westfield it was Matildas, that becomes nearly the highlight of that logo for them because they put a different coloured brand name between Matildas and the ball. And the fact that Matildas and Socceroos are identical and nearly hard to differentiate between the two of them probably is not handling the brand equity of each of them to make that happen. So maybe just quietly they're being ripped off on that front as well. So the story there for me is we identify stakeholders, we learn about, and I've just paralleled stakeholders and customers there because we want to learn about them and have some detail so we can influence them to hopefully get them to take the actions we want, be it vote for us, give to our charity, buy our Nikes, support our football club as it might be to make that happen. And the brand as being the final part about that is a shortcutting mechanism we do. So if you want to get elected, we're thinking about your brand and how you're going to communicate that to the target audience so that you can get the change that you seek to do. And leaders are always about the change that we seek. We're out there looking for ways to change, to upset and to make things different, I suppose, in the end of the world. And I'm going to flick past that one and go straight to this slide here because that is a great, I hope, segue to Jess because she's making change. She wants to change the world. She wants to change the status quo. And I'm not big for big introductions, Jess, but I'm going to just hand over to you and say thank you very much for coming along. And I really look forward to hearing about the Bullyology upstander story.
Thank you very much. Are you happy for me to share a presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me give you control of that. And cancel.
Okay.
Good to go with that. Thanks, Jess.
Thank you very much. Can everyone see me? Yeah, great. So this is a great segue because this is actually a picture from some of my new branding. So I'm currently working on my personal brand. So what you will see publicly is my Bullyology brand, but also I'm moving more to speak at business conferences about other things other than Bullyology. So the core is talking about Bullyology, which is my training and education business that focuses on providing training and education around bullying and harassment. But what's happened as I've progressed working across industries, organizations, and globally is I've been working on building upstanders across industry. So today I thought this is a great think tank and opportunity to talk about some of my favorite topics, which is upstanding versus bystanding. And ultimately, bullying and harassment is one piece of that puzzle I want to talk to you today about. So recently, I delivered a TEDx talk in the UK, and the theme was why bystanding poses the greatest threat to our world. So what I've done is dropped the TEDx talk into the chat. And I thought, because we've got such a small amount of time together today, I'm not going to repeat some of the topics in that. And I encourage you to please watch that because it talks about bystanding on a global scale. But also, ultimately, what I'm going to encourage you to do today is think about locally, whatever LGA you're within. A little bit about my story before we dive into some of the content. So as a founder of Bullyology in 2017, I launched my business, and that was ultimately following collapse and burnout. I moved to Australia in 2013, and prior to moving to Australia, I worked for a local council, Neath Talbot Council, as the youth and community manager, running youth drop-in centres. And moved to Australia, originally coming for 3 months, and a decade and a little bit later, I'm still here. I suffered extensive bullying working in the oil and gas industry, and unfortunately working in the male-dominated industry in the top end of Darwin. The more successful I became, the more I suffered bullying from my HR director. And looking back, the business was unethical in many aspects and mainly around people treatment. I was the preferred choice. And while I'm not going to dive too deep into my story today, I'm going to encourage you to listen to my TEDx and hopefully read one of my books. But what was really interesting about my story was the bullying, of course, but I reported the bullying 32 times. 32 times to people that had the power and influence to stop the bullying immediately if they chose to. Yet I found time and time again, the leaders within the business, from the CEO to project managers to supervisors, the behavior was common knowledge, it was witnessed and tolerated. Time and time again, it would fall into what I call the avoidance zone, where people would assume the behavior would go away by itself. It was packaged up as banter or a personality clash or the person's leadership style. So in this open plan office, unrealistic work tasks were set, belittling language, gender-based slurs that I now know and understand were discrimination and serious breach of policy and procedures. And I would often look around and think, how can predominantly, good people that were kind and also good colleagues and friends pretend they didn't hear the comments or look the other way? Or when we'd be in a board meeting, me and my other colleagues, predominantly males, sometimes like a council chamber, if there's, a gender, not equal gender or diversity, often I would look around and comments would be made around my gender, or I would be mimicked for my accent, or there would be slurs under the breath, or even sometimes openly swearing at me, dismissing me based on my gender, my cultural background. And time again, I would look around and not understand how people could look the other way. And now I realize there was something called the bystander effect present. And this is widely researched. It was originally through research by John Darley and Bib Lantine. And in my TEDx talk, I unpack this, but really research finds that there are 2 psychological tendencies that contribute to the bystander effect. And ultimately, in my own words, when things get challenging, tough, and uncomfortable, our natural instinct and desire is to diffuse responsibility. And through this research, it is found that the more people that are present, the less likely we are to feel like we need to respond or help. If you think of driving down the highway and there's been an accident, the bystander effect research says that if there's 1, 2, or the more people present to an incident or scene, the less likely we are to intervene. And then we think about boardrooms or council chambers, and we can hear a comment that is completely unethical, uncomfortable. And we know that it is wrong because often we feel that in our body. It makes us tense up, our jaw clench. And for me, it's that gut-wrenching feeling when we look around, and often people can pretend they didn't hear the comment or laugh. And ultimately, people assume that someone else will deal with it. And sometimes that resolution never comes. This is social referencing. It is a monkey see, monkey do mentality, where if no one else takes action, we tend to not intervene. So understanding the bystander effect for me made me realize that throughout our communities, cultures, in boardrooms, in classrooms, in community groups, that it is prevalent and is also poisonous, because ultimately I do know in society we will have bullies and perpetrators of injustice and violence. But I realized throughout my work that we actually are in a leadership crisis, where often people with influence and power, whether it's political influence and power or power within an organization, often know unethical practices and behaviors are happening, but they choose to look the other way. They become avoidant. They put it into the too hard basket. And reflecting on some of the conversations I heard earlier on, they can package up that they will deal with, say, violence against women if they are elected, or the rising, housing costs. And often they know there's suffering and injustice, but, it can be all smoke and mirrors or all talk. And what I wanted to do today was really dive into a new piece of thought leadership. And I am interested in your feedback and insights, because I'm ruminated and thinking about content for a future book. And I think that this is really contextualized for some of the conversations you've been having. And I'm calling this the business bystander matrix. In my work consulting across organisations and industries, I've worked with most of the regional councils in the Central West in some capacity, whether it's doing a full culture review, like I did at Orange City Council, and developing a leadership programme and rolling that out in 2021, to working in Blaney Council, developing upstander workshops and leadership, to a leadership programme at Dubbo Council, and so on. I've also worked with councils up on the East Coast, more recently Harvey Bay Council, where I worked with, I think it was 1,200 staff over 5 days. So this has really given me really interesting insights into some of the complexities of working in-house with council. And I think it's important that I let you know some of the biggest impacts on staff mental health and well-being and happiness is some of the behaviours of councillors and how they behave publicly in the media, but also behave to the staff. So zooming out, I talk about business, but I think that there are a few people that are business leaders and community leaders already and operating within council. So I want to talk you through the business bystander matrix. So the first part I want to talk to you about is cultural bystanding. So often within business and council, I can see different leaders valuing different aspects more than other. So I'm going to talk you through this. And at the end, I'd love to hear your insights, your stories, and ultimately offline, if you wanted to share some story of what you've witnessed or experience, I'd love to hear your story, because what I'm doing is collecting stories and data to strengthen this. So the first is cultural bystanding. So this occurs when organizations and business leaders observe cultural issues or practices within an organization that may be harmful, fall under the Discrimination Act, or be contradictory to workplace values. So it can encompass witnessing systematic discrimination, bullying, harassment, cultural insensitivity, and also exclusion practices. So I'm going to give you some examples, and I'm going to encourage you to go away and have a look at these examples. The first one is her name is Susan Fowler. Surname, oh, I got it on the next slide, but she was an engineer at Uber. And I personally hate the word whistleblowing because it comes with such negative connotations. And I think as society, we've framed anyone that has the courage to speak up in such a negative way. I prefer to call whistleblowers upstanders. But her story really highlights serious discrimination, sexual harassment, and bullying. And Susan initially wrote a blog post, which really was upstanding / whistleblowing against Uber. And what was really powerful about her story was how everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people felt unsafe. There was no psychological safety where people could speak up. And this powerful quote resonates with me deeply in my work. Susan Fowler said, when you see something that is potentially harmful or illegal and you do nothing about it, you are equally responsible. And that's definitely how I feel when I witness something that is culturally inappropriate, whether it's a comment in a boardroom or not valuing cultural sensitivity. So I want you to reflect on your career around cultural bystanding. What have you witnessed? What have you observed? Maybe walked by. And the second one is ethical bystanding. So when we think about ethical bystanding, this occurs when organizations witness ethical dilemmas, violations of ethical standards, or unethical behavior within the organization. So examples can include observing dishonesty, corruption, conflicts of interest, breaches of professional conduct. So an example would be, this is an American example. I recently did this keynote to a big American business. So some of them are Australian based, but I put a few global examples in. So Wells Fargo, if you're not familiar with this, this is a financial services business in San Francisco that had really, I would say, strong sales targets that actually pushed the employees to behave unethically, setting up unauthorized accounts. There was a culture of silence, unethical breaches around policy procedures, bribes, and it actually led to some serious investigations and a lot of trouble for senior executives. And what it was found out of the Wells Fargo saga was employees felt pressured to meet unrealistic sales quotas, leading many to stay silent around unethical practices, despite recognizing and understanding there was wrongdoing. It was overlooked, so the ethics was completely out the window. And they realized ultimately through investigation that speaking up came with risks. People were fearful of retaliation, and there was threats on job security, safety, and even to people's, livelihoods and well-being. And it really created a bystander culture where there was this ethical dilemma. And so ultimately, organizations need to empower ethical standards and actions. So thinking about ethical bystanding in your career, what have you witnessed? What have you observed? And I'm sure there's a few people smiling. You can think of a few examples of breaches of policies. I know I've got my own stories around ethical misconduct, misreporting of safety figures, breaches of policies, and definitely legislation. So the third part is environmental bystanding. So when we think about environmental bystanding, this became really important to me when I did research for my book, The Upstander Leader, How to Develop a Speak Up Culture. So I spoke to a lot of individuals within organizations, and ultimately those Gen Zs and millennials. And we do know that 35% of millennials will moving towards leadership positions, 35% organizations by 2030, 35% of employees will be millennials in leadership positions. So ultimately what we found was a lot of people were really choosing to work for an organization, stay in an organization when they were valuing not just the humans in the business, but people, profit and planet. And environmental bystanding really started to become a topic that I was interested in, because what I was finding was organizations not sustaining staff if they don't look at all areas of the business. And Gen Zs in particular were really passionate about working for organizations and supporting leaders who value the planet. So whether that's environmental aspects of recycling or ethical product development and packaging. So when we think about environmental bystanding, an organisation that came to mind more recently, and I was working in-house delivering training, and a group of young workers, young voters, I would probably say, started to tell me stories about how they'd been let down by some of the fashion brands that they support. So again, this is on branding. They were talking to me about H&M and their campaign around conscious collection. And actually, when it got investigated, it was found that 98% of their marketing and 98% of what they had said publicly was untrue with regards to greenwashing and marketing, and they weren't ethically sourcing. It was fast fashion. So again, a lot of people are feeling let down by brands that are saying things that they're not following through. And that also comes from leaders who are leading councils, organizations and political leaders. So if we think about ethical bystanding, I think that it's really important to business leaders to think about where they stand. And that's not just about the humans within the business, but also the environmental factors. And the last one in the business bystander matrix is social bystanding. So this occurs when organizations ignore social issues, allowing them to persist or worsen over time. So if we think about social bystanding, I deliver workshops on cultural issues. They can be talking about the Me Too movement, or mentioning the March for Justice, or equal rights around gay marriage, as an example, Black Lives Matter movement. So as part of my workshops, I often put up a slide with some topical movements that are really important because they are social issues that are happening. And you'd be surprised about how many people in organizations that are leading pretty significant organizations have not heard of the Me Too movement and also Black Lives Matter movement. And it actually shocks me. So I think that's what is important, is leaders that have a finger on the pulse with issues that are happening socially, whether that's in your local community, what people are rallying for. And I know personally, living in Orange, I spoke at a rally on the no more violence against women. And again, representing something I'm passionate about, but also the Rainbow Festival that has opened up a deeper connection to different areas of the community. We're talking to people that are now asking me to join different groups, advocate for different movements. So it's interesting to think that when you lean in to learn more about different areas, how that can deepen your connection and also really build upon your credibility as a leader. Sometimes I don't always agree with some of the movements if they are hate related or it's probably not unethical is the right word, but it's important to have a finger on the pulse of what's happening so you can at least listen and empathize. You'd be surprised about how many leaders within organizations sit in that glass office and care about the profits and the margins and don't actually have a finger on the pulse on what's happening at a ground level. And when we think about social bystanding, some of the examples are how social media can influence your personal and professional brand. I often say to leaders, if you ignore social issues or you make comments online that can haunt you, a reputation can take a lifetime to build, but it can be gone overnight. And I think one of the big issues at the moment is how social media is playing into fake or false news. And one of them is social media around Facebook, where there's a lot of hate speech that has been not managed correctly and has been influencing a lot of our young youth anxiety and depression. And if I think about more recently, if you aren't aware with the article where our Prime Minister was calling out Elon Musk around Twitter and X, what was happening, and it was awful to watch and see shared. But with the recent stabbing incidents in New South Wales, a lot of the content was being shared and the videos on X, Twitter. For people that don't resonate with the word X, I'm still confused with it. But what was happening there was I was thinking, we are socially bystanding. I am watching this content. It's making me uncomfortable. How do I unsee this? So the Prime Minister was calling out Elon Musk for not taking down harmful content. So again, it's important to think about what is impacting people within your LGA or within your business or your community, because ultimately being a leader with a finger on the pulse around the whole bystander matrix, social, cultural, environmental and ethical, can make sure that you're not missing the beat on different areas. So ultimately, my question to you is, and I'm sure we're all upstanders on this call that want to better our community and world and lean into topics that make us uncomfortable. I encourage you to think about, are you part of the problem or solution? And I know that often working within the ecosystem of highly toxic, poisonous environments can beat us down. And I often reflect on times where I've been a bystander or witness behavior, and I think, oh, my cup is pretty empty and I've been a bystander, and those memories haunt me. So I would love to hear your insights into the bystander matrix, but ultimately connect with me offline. Ultimately, what I'm doing is building a generation of upstanders, one person, one voice and one action at a time, and hopefully creating a movement of conscious leaders that can ultimately leave the world in a better place than we found it. Any questions? I put this one back up in case anyone's got any.
Nice work, Jessica. So many good messages there for what we're talking about for sure. Who's got some questions of Jess there? Do you want to yell them out and ask her what's going on with that, how that fits into your world?
Sometimes I feel like just, sorry. Sometimes I feel like just being on Facebook is enough of the social bystanding. Like I just feel like the some of the comments and things, like you don't want to make another comment because then it just keeps rolling on. So you tend to not comment even though it makes you feel uncomfortable reading it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah,
so.
I totally agree. And I think at this point, what is really important as whether you're in a councillor position or progress more into a public role is tall poppy syndrome. And I've realised in my business, the more successful you become, unfortunately, the more people will want to put you down. And tall poppy syndrome is really prevalent in Australian culture. And I recently did a TEDx talk that got 100,000 views. And I had a quick, hard lesson in the more you grow, the more hate you have. And it's really interesting on Facebook. I think it was Linda that made the comment. I'm on stage talking about why bystander poses the greatest threat to our world and violence, and yet some of the comments that now have been removed were, wouldn't it be funny if someone came on stage and punched her and the whole audience didn't know what to do? And then there was like all of these nice comments, but then hateful comments. So it's really hard. And I think that I talk to leaders all the time that really struggle or retreat. And I've also worked with a few councillors in various roles that when they started to develop their public profile, hate became part of it. And it is really difficult to manage. And I think that having open conversations around tall poppy syndrome and hate on social media is an important part of this process, because bullying infiltrates all aspects of our environment. And it's interesting being in the business of anti-bullying, yet getting bullied online. And I've got the toolkit to deal with it, but sometimes it's like, gosh, that comment was mean, and you can have 100 nice comments and that one comment may keep you up at night.
Michelle, did you want to go with your question?
I'm not sure if it was a question more than an observation. I am in council and I am part of a world and the only female in my world. And it's not even, I wouldn't say it was an perceived, I mean, it's not certainly not perceived as active bullying or, whatever. It's just the ghosting and the silence and the lecturing. I think for me is like I get a fair bit of feedback, which comes more across like War and Peace than actually anything that's helpful. Don't have an outlet in that space.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And again, often people say, is this bullying, is this not? I think on that comment, if it's undermining you or making you feel a certain way, that is definitely worth unpacking with someone, Michelle. And I think that it's really difficult being in a position where it's an interesting dynamic, right? Because what I found with councils is it's not the typical in-house, organisation where you can signpost for help, because sometimes you can feel like a bit of a lone wolf with a pack of wolves, as it's been described to me by other councillors. So it can be really challenging. But I think that my small bit of advice would be to make sure that you've got someone you can trust to debrief with, because a problem shared is a problem halved, and sometimes they may not know the answer, but just validating your feelings, because otherwise, I know personally when I was undermined and spoke over constantly and just made to be feel belittled, that was quite an isolating, lonely space for me. And my advice to anyone is get a bloody good psychologist, because that ultimately is my go-to when I'm, feeling overwhelmed or burnt out, or ultimately just need someone to unpack what I'm going through.
Thank you.
I think it's real, and the reason Jess popped up into my feed to get her in for this course is that this whole councillor gig is kind of archaic in the way it operates. Certainly the representation of females is really low and probably problematic, and don't want to turn up again for a second election, etc. So it's a tough gig, and it's going to be a bit of a slow road to hoe in the short term for women in local government politics, I'm sure. But and that's the trick, and I think I agree with Michelle there, is that many of the things that happen to people, and I've only been to a few meetings, but you hear it, it's the subtext which dictates whether you're in or you're out, whether you're included, you're not, you should behave this way or that way. And it's not really overtly done, but it's underpinning. So it's that mansplaining, partially, I don't want to just put men under the bus, but probably is, mansplaining.
I'm glad you said that, Andrew, because I was going to use that word, Michelle, and I don't want to make gender assumptions here, but again, there was an incident in Parliament this week where there's over social media around the mansplaining. Is this mansplaining? Is this not? So again, that was a word that came to my mind, but I didn't want to make gender assumptions.
Yeah, no, I think it's a reality, that sort of thing too. And again, that pulls me back into my communication space. Lots of people in organisations and organisations run by men, they're happy to talk about stuff till the cows come home. Way too much, way in depth, way unconnected, not actionable. And that's that. There's too much instead of meaningful dialogue about stuff. And so, yeah, men need to bite their
100%.
tongues a bit and be more conscious about how they communicate things. And we need to be more open, because if any one gender or person had all the good ideas about anything, then the world would be shooting ahead, that lots of people would be doing it, but we don't, and we've all got problems, and all our organisations are partially dysfunctional, and so we need this diversity aspect, you know, to happen. And unless it's safe, it's not going to happen. So, and it's hard to call out. You know, I've had my own difficulties with calling out behaviours with things, and it's the bad behaviour is so ingrained in organisations that they don't really see it. And in the case that I was involved with, it took a third party, you know, accrediting body to pull up a large educational institution with some problems they had, that they didn't want to look at it internally. They're happy with the way it was. So, and it's hard, and there's no benefits for really being the upstander at this point in time. Hopefully that gets better for everyone though.
I totally agree. And look, it would be naive of me to say that being an upstander is easy, because ultimately, if we're talking about the conversation of being a councillor and creating change, I mean, a change maker, and I heard someone say earlier, I love change. But ultimately, change is uncomfortable, and you know, creating that change agility or cultural agility mindset, I talk about that as well, creates, you know, opportunity to challenge the status quo, which ultimately ruffles a lot of feathers. And look, the thing that I carry forth in my work, because I go into organizations, I talk about hierarchical structures, and often, you know, I'm not going to be everyone's cup of tea, because I can ruffle a lot of feathers, particularly if there are old systems and they don't want change. But in my mind, I go, okay, so if my message can inspire the next generation, that ultimately we can create change through a generational, and that's on my last slide. You would have seen I said I'm creating a generation of change, because I know that my work is going to take my lifetime and legacy to do so. And ultimately, that's what I carry forth in my work. And often I can deliver a talk and it can be, you know, sometimes grumpy, maybe old men that sit there, and then often I will get
Mediocre
a message
males, who
afterwards.
said that?
You know, I work in construction, mining, agriculture. Often it can be in the middle of nowhere, and they can go, oh, what's this? And I can go, okay, if I can get a couple of people today and make them feel seen, heard, and valued. And ultimately, I often get messages afterwards going, thank you so much. I needed that message. Or often it can be the naysayers that come on the journey. But again, that's a long road. So again, you're not going to win everyone. But if you think about that council chamber, delivering a message, challenging that behavior, it may not be immediately recognizable to you that you've created that change, but guaranteed someone will quietly think like, thank you for giving me a voice, or thank you for speaking up. And ultimately it can be signposting someone to help, or recognizing after the meeting. For me, it was a colleague coming to me and saying, hey Jess, what happened today was totally unacceptable. You are being bullied and harassed. I feel uncomfortable to challenge it in that boardroom, but let me signpost you to help. This is the EAP number. You give it to everyone else. You fill everyone else's cup, but I want to support you. And that conversation potentially saved my life, because I was in a very dark mental health space. So sometimes being an upstander is just recognizing when something is wrong and signposting someone to help, and that person can ultimately be you as well.
Nice. Nice indeed. Great place there to wrap that up. Can I get you to hand back control of the screen to me too, Jess?
Yeah, and happy if anyone wants to have a conversation offline. Yeah, happy to do so.
Excellent indeed. Too good. Let me just get that one going back on again. And I think you might have can you try the screen control thing back again? You might just have to actually right click on the little ellipses next to my name and give me control back. There you go. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, great.
Perfect. There you go. That'll just give you that screen back so that you can see that. We can wrap that off as well. Cool. That was awesome, Jess. Thank you very much. It does dovetail in beautifully with lots and so many of the messages that we've been talking about in this course as well. So I really appreciate you taking the time out. All the best with your ventures, your authoring, your TEDx's, which is such a cool thing to have done. And clearly you're getting lots of traction with people around the country with different things. So I look forward to seeing you on the journey for that. And I'm sure we'll cross paths again with that. And just from everyone here tonight, thank you very much for sharing all that information with us and time with us as well to make that happen. That's cool. I'm just going to wrap the recording up there because that has stopped anyhow, I think. No, it's not. All right, just having a few control issues on my end. Sorry for that. Apologize. I've just got something going on with that. Can you guys see the slides at the moment, or you can only see the faces?
Slides.
There you go. That's pretty good. Excellent. Perfect. Thank you very much, everybody. Much appreciated your time. Let me get back to my final slide there, which was that one there. Go make something happen. I'll see you all again next week. And we'll talk more about all sorts of other things, leadership. Please bring your ideas and thoughts along. Thanks again very much, Jessica, for helping us out tonight. Much appreciate your time. Have a great night, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.